Is it a comment on the way we perceive the world that television, its progress and decay, was nearly as big a newsmaker last year as the progress and decay of the world itself? Now we will look back with reporter Amy Marcellus and visit with the Twin Cities TV critics Bryant Lambert on tape and then Noel Holston here in the studio.
This police drama contains adult language. Viewer discretion is advised.
NYPD Blue was more than a cop show breaking new ground in TV drama. Some even called it soft porn, prompting critics to read the Riot Act.
Some of the shows that came under the greatest scrutiny really didn't deserve it in the ways that we usually think of violence. NYPD Blue being one of them. I think this was actually a very tasteful show. My pet line is that there's almost nothing on television in a year that is as good as the best movie.
If Charles Dickens were alive today, he might say about TV viewing in 1993, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Of course, Dickens would have been reading a good book instead of watching TV, but that's beside the point.
May ought to be called National Glorified TV Violence Month.
And just what the Dickens is going on? Congress trying to censor the networks in the event they can't regulate themselves? The congressional hearings top our list of 1993's biggest TV stories.
And I think some of my colleagues are going to be pushing and pushing hard.
I think TV can regulate itself. I think to some extent it has. I think there's less violence now on network primetime programming than probably 3 or 4 years ago. The congressional hearings, frankly, to me, seem to be a lot more posturing than real effect.
The hearings were big, but they couldn't match the hype of the year's biggest winner.
Foucault.
Try again.
It's The Late Show with David Letterman.
I can't think of anybody who made a bigger killing financially and critically than he did, and I think he's going to pay off really well for CBS. I think he already has.
Now here he is, Chevy Chase.
$30 million down the drain in just 6 weeks. Chevy Chase flops in Olympic fashion.
I feel like $100.
Woohoo! Jackpot! Crazy like a fox, the fledgling network sacked CBS, stripping the NFL and John Madden away with a $1 billion poke in the eye in TV's biggest surprise. Through the thrill of victory...
You still think you're bad? Huh?
And the agony of bad ratings, our critic critiques TV 93 in a nutshell. Beavis and Butthead.
Decline of Western civilization.
Connie Chung teaming with Dan Rather.
Pipe and slippers.
David Letterman.
Smartass.
His successor, Conan O'Brien.
Fat boy.
The final Cheers episode.
Maximum exploitation.
And finally, that classic, South of Sunset.
What?
Before I'm canceled, I'm Amy Marcellus.
She's out of there. As trenchant a critic as his St. Paul counterpart is Noel Holston, the TV critic and reviewer for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. We have agreed pretty much that the dominant force, that the most controversial idea of the very idea of television in this country last year continued to be violence. What are your feelings about that?
I think it's a legitimate issue, Dave, but I think that most of the efforts that were raised by Senator Paul Simon and others, including Attorney General Janet Reno, lashing out at the networks and stuff, was really misplaced, because whatever sins the networks and their local stations like CCO might commit in terms of violent programming, it pales before what is being done on cable and often on independent stations that have much more lax standards about what they show. And I think that this is a lot of easy target stuff that the Congress is looking at, like, you know, threatening local TV stations, network affiliates, and networks, when in fact they are the least offenders. There are things running on cable and that you can rent at the video store that are vastly more offensive and more gruesomely violent than anything that ever passes the test on network television.
Mr. Lambert suggested that the violence this year was not as great, not as flagrant as it has been in the past.
I think it's down substantially. You can just look at the primetime schedules of the major networks and see that there are very few cop shows, very few westerns, very few of the kinds of programs that had that kind of gunplay and mayhem in them. And in fact, a lot of them, shows like Law and Order on NBC, which is an excellent cop show, is basically a nonviolent show. It's about procedure and about the prosecution of criminals once they're caught. If you look back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you see dozens of FBI-type shows and private eye shows and so forth, Magnum and Beretta and Kojak and so on. You look back 30 years ago, there were 40-something Westerns in prime time, even the ones remembered fondly as being kind of like family Westerns like Bonanza. Little Joe Cartwright shot more people than Billy the Kid did.
My meager hope back there a few moments ago for a program that would include a sense of civility and literacy for contemporary people succeeding. Is there any hope for that, or has there been?
I think there's hope for it, and I think every year brings one or two programs of that type. I think there's one that actually has beaten the odds and survived. CBS's Northern Exposure is a very civil, contemplative program. It's a very odd thing to say about a primetime show, but it's the exception. You see shows like Brooklyn Bridge and Frank's Place and I'll Fly Away, and the current series Against the Grain about a high school football coach and his family, shows that are trying to really do stories that don't involve violence, that show that there's other ways to create dramatic conflict besides whacking somebody over the head with a stick or something. And they're all struggling. All those others have been canceled. Against the Grain is on the very verge of cancellation right now. The only thing that's going to save them is if people start to watch them and push the ratings up. That's the secret of the ending the violence and making the good stuff, the benign or socially benevolent programming sort of rise to the top. It's just what viewers do with their time.
The people have to complain. They have to be heard. Otherwise, the things will go on.
Absolutely. I find people to be all too quiet these days about television. I'm amazed. It seems like the broadening of choice through cable and so forth has watered it down. People used to call me up all the time or write to me and complain about things. Now, most things that they would have complained about 10 years ago, they just sort of shrug their shoulders and sort of assume that they can't do anything about it. Well, they can. You know, they can write letters, they can get involved, they can turn the dial, they can watch the things they think are better for people.
Thank you, Noel, for the message, for taking the time with us. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
In a moment, we will join one Lonnie Dupre, a man preparing a double-purpose mission. Into Siberia with his dogs, he will deliver a message on environmental care, and he will document a people about whom so little is known. In a moment.